The house was quiet tonight, the kind of quiet that presses in on you when you're the only one awake. I'd been working on the old computer in the study again, losing track of time as the cursor blinked stubbornly on the screen. The air in the room was stale, thick with the smell of old paper and dust. I finally pushed back my chair, the joints in my knees cracking, and decided to head to bed. Stepping out of the study, I turned left towards the bedroom, the path I'd walked 1,000 times. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow bleeding from the study door behind me. My hand brushed against the smooth, familiar wallpaper. 3 steps, then the small rug. 2 more steps, and the door frame. But after 5 steps, my hand was still on the wall, and my foot hadn't hit the rug. That was odd. The hallway wasn't long. I took another step, then another. The darkness felt deeper here, somehow thicker. The faint light from the study seemed further away than it should be. A prickle of unease started at the back of my neck. I stopped, listening. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the sound of my own breathing, which suddenly seemed too loud. I took a step back, trying to orient myself. My hand found the edge of the study door frame. Okay, I was here. I turned back towards the bedroom and started walking again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. Still no rug, no door frame, just the unbroken wall under my fingertips and the endless stretch of dark hallway ahead. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't right. I knew this house. I'd lived here for 10 years. The hallway from the study to the bedroom was short, maybe 15 feet at most. I should have been there already. I kept walking, a sense of growing panic tightening my chest. 10 steps, 15, 20. The hallway showed no sign of ending. The wall felt the same under my hand. The floor felt level beneath my feet. But the destination wasn't appearing. The light from the study was now just a faint, distant square. I stopped again, turning around. I could barely see the study door now, a dim rectangle in the gloom. Had I somehow taken a wrong turn? That was impossible. It was a straight hallway. Maybe I was just disoriented from working late. I decided to go back to the study, collect myself, and try again. I turned and started walking towards the faint light. 5 steps, 10, 15. The light didn't get any closer. It remained a small, distant beacon, mocking my efforts. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This was more than disorientation. The hallway was stretching. The house was changing. I started to run back towards the study, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the silence. The distant light remained distant. No matter how fast I ran, I didn't seem to cover any ground. The wall blurred past me, but the view ahead stayed the same. The seemingly endless dark hallway, the tiny square of light far away. I slowed to a walk, panting. This was a nightmare, but I wasn't dreaming. The dryness in my throat, the ache in my legs, the cold knot of fear in my stomach, it was all real. I stopped, leaning my forehead against the cool, smooth wallpaper. What was happening? Was I still in my house? It felt like it, smelled faintly of the familiar old wood and plaster, but it was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to clear my head. When I opened them, the light from the study was gone. Absolute darkness. Panic flared, hot and sharp. I fumbled along the wall, trying to find the door frame, but there was nothing but the smooth, continuous surface. I was trapped in the dark, in a hallway that shouldn't exist. I started to walk again, slower this time, feeling my way along the wall. The air was getting colder. That faint, familiar house smell was being replaced by something else, something damp and earthy, like walking into a cellar after a heavy rain. The hallway seemed to curve now, gently, almost imperceptibly. The wall under my hand was no longer flat. It had a rougher texture, like unpainted plaster. I could hear a faint dripping sound somewhere ahead in the darkness. Drip, drip, drip. I kept going, drawn forward by the sound, the only break in the suffocating silence. The air grew colder, The earthy smell stronger. The floor felt damp under my feet now, cold and slightly slick. The hallway opened into a larger space. I could tell from the echo of my footsteps and the change in the air pressure. The dripping sound was louder here, a steady plink of water hitting water. I fumbled for my phone, trying to use the screen glow as a light source, but like the first story's protagonist, my phone was dead, a useless black rectangle. The darkness was absolute, but the dripping sound guided me. I took cautious steps forward, my hands outstretched. My fingers brushed against something cold and rough. Stone. The walls here were stone, slick with moisture. The earthy smell was thick enough to taste. I reached out further, my hand finding the edge of something, a stone lip. I knelt down, feeling the cool, still surface of water. The dripping was hitting the water directly in front of me. I was at the edge of some kind of underground pool or cistern. The air was heavy and still, the cold seeping into my clothes. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from the chilling realization that I was deep underground, in a place that had no connection to the house I knew. How had I gotten here? I heard a new sound then, subtle at first, barely audible over the dripping. A faint, rhythmic scraping, coming from across the water. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I strained my eyes in the darkness, trying to see something across the water, but it was too dark. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate. It sounded like something being dragged across rough stone. The dripping suddenly stopped. The silence returned, broken only by that chilling scraping sound. It seemed closer now. Scrape, scrape, scrape. My breath hitched in my throat. I wanted to back away, but I felt rooted to the spot, listening to that awful sound, drawing nearer in the pitch blackness. The earthy smell was mixed with something else now, something fouler, like stagnant water and decay. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then a new sound, a wet, heavy splash from directly across the water, followed by another. And another. Like something large and wet was heaving itself out of the water. The smell intensified, a wave of putrescence washing over me. I could hear faint, wet, slithering sounds now coming towards my side of the pool. The air was thick, heavy, vibrating with a low thrumming that felt like it was coming from deep within the earth beneath me. I scrambled backwards, away from the edge of the water, bumping into the rough stone wall behind me. The slithering sounds grew louder, closer. I could hear the distinct sound of something heavy and wet dragging itself over stone. My back was pressed against the cold, damp stone. The slithering and dragging sounds were right in front of me now, just inches away in the total darkness. I could hear faint, wet gasps like something struggling to breathe air that was too dry for it. The smell was unbearable, a concentrated stench of decay and damp earth. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing it was a dream, praying I would wake up in my bed, but the cold stone against my back was real. The foul smell filling my lungs was real. The sounds of something monstrous moving in the darkness before me were terrifyingly real. A new sound began, a low guttural click. Click, click, click. It was wet, resonant, and seemed to vibrate in my bones. It came from the same place as the slithering and gasping. Then something brushed against my leg, cold, wet, and slick. I cried out, a choked sound swallowed by the oppressive darkness. I flinched away, but the contact lingered for just a second too long. Another wet touch on my arm, then my face, cold, formless, leaving a trail of icy dampness on my skin. The click, click, click grew louder, closer. I could feel the air shift before me as the unseen thing moved. It wasn't a solid shape. It felt fluid, shifting, but heavy. It smelled of the earth and the stagnant water, but also something else, something ancient and impossibly vast. The wet, clicking sound was right next to my ear now, and then a wet, fleshy sound, like something unfolding. followed by a dry, scraping whisper, just like the static in the walls of the other house, but deeper, older. It was unintelligible, a sound that felt like it was scraping directly against my sanity. I opened my eyes even though there was nothing to see. I just couldn't keep them closed anymore. The darkness was absolute, but I felt the presence of the thing before me, immense and terrifying. Its cold, wet touch was everywhere now, on my hands, my neck, my hair. The whispering grew slightly louder, still not words, but sounds that felt wrong, alien. The wet clicking continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I could feel its weight shifting before me, the stone floor groaning faintly under it. It leaned closer. I could feel its foul breath on my face, cold and damp and smelling of rot. The wet clicking was deafening, and then I felt something press against my mouth, soft, wet, and strangely yielding. It lingered there, and I felt a strange, gentle pressure. The pressure increased. It wasn't hostile, not violent. It felt inquisitive, like it was trying to understand the shape of my mouth, my teeth, my tongue. The wet clicking stopped. The whispering stopped. All sound faded except for the slow, rhythmic plink of the dripping water somewhere in the darkness. I waited frozen for something to happen, for the bite, the tearing, the end. But it didn't come. The soft, wet pressure remained on my mouth, unmoving. After an eternity, the pressure receded. The air felt empty before me. The sounds did not return. The dripping of the water was the only thing I could hear. I stayed there in the darkness, leaning against the cold stone, trembling. Had it gone? Was it waiting? I didn't know. The silence felt different now, heavier, charged with a terrifying uncertainty. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself away from the wall and began to move, feeling my way through the absolute darkness, trying to find an end to the stone. A way back to the hallway, back to the house, back to a reality that made sense. I walked for what felt like hours, the stone walls relentless under my fingertips, the air cold and damp, the dripping water my only companion. I never found an end to the stone. I never found the hallway. Now I just walk in the dark, listening to the drip, drip, drip. And sometimes, very faintly, I can feel a strange, wet pressure on my mouth, even though there's nothing there. And when I listen very, very closely, over the sound of the dripping, I think I can hear it too, echoing from the wet stone walls around me. Click, click, click. Please consider giving this story a like if you found it unsettling. Subscribe to the channel for more true horror stories and leave a comment below with your thoughts. The old farmhouse settled around me like a dusty blanket. Quiet except for the persistent, low static coming from somewhere inside the walls. It wasn't electrical, it felt alive. I bought the place cheap. A fixer-upper, they called it. Secluded, surrounded by fields, miles from the nearest town. Perfect for getting away, for writing, for the quiet life I craved. But the quiet wasn't what I got. From the first night, there was the static. It was faint at first, easy to dismiss as old wiring or interference. A soft hiss like a radio tuned between stations. But it was always there, a constant, irritating backdrop to the silence. I tried turning off all the power at the breaker box. The lights went out, the refrigerator stopped humming, but the static remained, a faint, dry rustling that seemed to originate from the plaster itself. I put my ear against the wall in the living room. The static was louder there, a dry, papery sound mixed with that low hiss. It wasn't behind the wall, it felt in the wall, embedded in the very structure of the house. I moved from room to room, mapping its presence. Strongest in the living room, hallway, and the bedroom upstairs. Fainter in the kitchen and bathroom. It wasn't just the sound. Sometimes when I was close to the wall, I felt a faint vibration, a low thrumming that matched the rhythm of the static. It was like the house had a low-grade fever shivering with this unseen energy. The air in those rooms felt charged, heavy with an unseen presence. I tried everything to locate the source. I tapped the walls, listened for hollow spots, checked for drafts. Nothing. The static was just there. It started to get under my skin. The constant, meaningless noise was maddening. I found myself talking to the walls, telling it to stop, pleading with it to be quiet. Of course, it never did. Sleep became difficult. Lying in bed, the static in the bedroom walls felt amplified, a constant, irritating whisper right next to my ear. It started to sound less like static and more like murmuring. Low, indistinct voices just below the threshold of understanding. I'd strained to hear them, holding my breath until my ears ached, but the sounds never resolved into words, just that maddening dry rustle and hiss. I started spending more time outside just to escape the noise. I'd sit on the porch swing, watching the sun set over the fields, listening to the crickets and the wind in the grass. Normal sounds, real sounds. But when I went back inside, the static was waiting. One evening I was reading in the living room, the static filling the air, when I noticed something on the wall. A faint discoloration, a patch of slightly darker paint, about the size of my hand. I hadn't seen it before. I reached out and touched it. The paint felt dry, but beneath it, I felt that familiar, faint vibration, stronger now, and the static intensified right where my hand was, a furious buzzing. I pulled my hand back as if stung. The patch on the wall seemed to throb faintly in the dim light. I watched it, mesmerized and terrified. The static seemed to be focused around it now, a low, angry hum. Over the next few days, the patch grew. It spread slowly, like a dark stain bleeding through the paint. And as it grew, the static intensified, becoming louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a hiss anymore, it was a dry scraping, a sound like countless tiny feet skittering just beneath the surface. I knew I should leave, pack a bag and drive away and never look back. But I felt rooted to the spot, morbidly fascinated by the growing stain and the noise. It felt like a wound opening in the house, and the static was the sound of something trying to get out. One night, the noise changed again. The scraping and hissing were still there, but now there was a new sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping, coming from inside the wall, from behind the dark stain. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate, like someone gently knocking from the other side. The tapping grew more confident. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, tap. It had a pattern now, a simple rhythm that burrowed into my brain. The dark stain on the wall was larger than my torso now, a pulsing black heart on the pale plaster. The static around it was a roaring cloud of sound. I stood inches from the wall, my forehead pressed against the cool surface, straining to hear the tapping. Was it a message? Was it trying to communicate? The thought was both absurd and terrifying. What could be inside the wall tapping? The tapping stopped. The static seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick, heavy, smelling faintly of dust and ozone. Then, slowly, a new sound began. A low, grating sound, like stone on stone. It came from the center of the dark stain. The paint there seemed to bulge outward slightly. The grating continued, growing louder, more forceful. It was like something was scraping away the plaster, the lath, the very structure of the wall. Dust fine as powder began to fall from the ceiling near the stain. A crack appeared in the paint, running vertically through the center of the dark patch. The cracking sound was loud in the oppressive silence of the house. The static was a frenzied roar now, a storm of noise around the growing crack. I watched, frozen as the crack widened, revealing not wood or plaster, but a deeper, inky blackness within. From that blackness the tapping resumed, but it was different now, louder, closer. It sounded like knuckles hitting wood. Then a sliver of white appeared in the crack. Not wood, not bone. It was too smooth, too pale. It looked like fingernail. A fingernail pushing its way through the crack in the wall. Then another and another. thin, pale, moving slowly, deliberately, like the legs of some unseen insect crawling from a dark hole. The static shrieked, the crack widened further, pulled apart by the pressure from within. More fingernails emerged, scrabbling against the edges of the opening, widening it inch by agonizing inch. They were long, brittle-looking, and stained with that same inky blackness. Behind the fingernails, something else was moving in the darkness, a shape indistinct and shifting, but giving off that same powerful vibration that thrummed through the house. The air grew colder, the smell of ozone stronger. The static was a chaotic symphony of horror. The opening was now large enough to see a sliver of what was behind the fingernails. It was dark, but not empty. There was a texture to the darkness, a shifting, rippling surface that seemed to absorb all light. And from within it came a low, guttural whisper, drowned out by the static but felt deep in my chest. The fingernails continued their work, scraping, pulling, widening the gap. They were relentless, tireless. I could see now that they were attached to something. Thin, pale fingers that were bending and twisting at unnatural angles as they worked. A wet, sucking sound began to join the static, a sound that mirrored the first story's climax but drier, more brittle. It was the sound of something tearing through aged materials. Plaster dust billowed outwards as a section of the wall gave way, revealing a larger opening into the inky blackness. And from that blackness, something began to emerge. Not a face, not a body. It was formless, amorphous, a shifting mass of shadows and faint, pale appendages that ended in those dreadful fingernails. It moved with a strange, jerky motion, flowing like thick oil through the opening. The static reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that vibrated through the very air. The smell of ozone was sharp, like before a lightning strike, and the thing from the wall continued to emerge, dripping with that impossible darkness, its pale fingers scrabbling against the remnants of the plaster. Its movements were becoming more fluid now, less like something being squeezed through a hole, and more like something slithering out. I could see glimpses of a slick, dark surface beneath the pale fingers, something that seemed to writhe and pulse. The whispering grew slightly clearer, though still unintelligible, a dry, sibilant sound, like sand being poured over paper. It was halfway out now, its formless mass filling the opening in the wall. The air was thick with its presence, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me. The vibration in the floor was a constant tremor, and then I saw the eyes. Not eyes in the conventional sense. They were pinpricks of pure, burning white light, appearing within the shifting blackness of its formless head. 3 of them arranged in a triangle. They focused on me, and I felt a cold, piercing intelligence in their gaze. The scraping, tapping, and slurping sounds intensified. It was almost entirely out of the wall now, standing before me like a column of sentient shadow and bone. Its pale fingers reached towards me, bending and flexing, the fingernails clicking softly against each other. I didn't run. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the sheer, impossible horror of it. It loomed over me, dripping darkness onto the floorboards, filling the room with its static roar and the smell of ozone and something ancient and dry. Its pale fingers, tipped with those horrifying fingernails, reached my face. They were cold, brittle. They didn't grab me, they simply touched. And then the static stopped. The whispering stopped. The scraping and tapping stopped. There was only silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a new sound, a sound that was only in my head, but was as loud as any physical noise. Click, click, click. The sound of my own fingernails growing impossibly long, tapping against the inside of my skull. If you felt a chill from this story, please leave a like. Subscribe to the channel for more unsettling accounts, and share your thoughts in the comments section below. It started subtly, a phantom taste in my mouth, like ash mixed with old iron. It was unpleasant, persistent, and it wasn't going away. I first noticed it during dinner a week ago. My wife, Sarah, had made her famous lasagna. It smelled incredible, looked perfect. But when I took a bite, all I tasted was that strange mix of ash and iron. It was faint at first, easily attributed to maybe needing to brush my teeth or a weird reaction to the wine. But it didn't go away. The next morning, my coffee tasted like bitter ash water. Toast was like gnawing on burnt metal. Every meal, every drink was overlaid with this increasingly strong foul taste. It wasn't in the food. Sarah tasted it fine. It was in me. I brushed my teeth obsessively, gargled with mouthwash, even tried those strange herbal rinses Sarah found online. Nothing worked. The taste was constant, a chemical burn on my tongue, a dryness in my throat that no amount of water could quench. It was like my mouth had become a graveyard for burnt things and forgotten machinery. The taste wasn't just a sensation, it started to feel like a foreign presence, a thin, dry film on my tongue that I couldn't scrape off. My saliva felt gritty, like fine sand. I started carrying a water bottle everywhere, constantly trying to wash the taste away, but it was useless. It began to affect my mood. I was irritable, withdrawn. The joy of eating, something I'd always loved, was gone, replaced by a daily chore of forcing down bland sustenance just to function. Sarah was worried. She suggested a doctor. The doctor found nothing wrong. My mouth was healthy, no signs of infection or disease. My blood work was normal. He suggested it might be stress or perhaps a lingering effect of a past illness I didn't remember. He prescribed a strong mouthwash that tasted like chemicals and regret. It did nothing. The taste deepened. It wasn't just ash and iron now. There was a new note, something acrid and metallic like old blood, and beneath it, a faint sweetness, sickly and unsettling. It made my stomach turn. The smell of food became repulsive. The only thing I could tolerate was plain water, and even that had the undertone of my internal foulness. I started losing weight. Sarah tried to coax me to eat, cooking my favorite meals, but the smell alone was enough to send me running to the bathroom, gagging. The taste was a physical barrier between me and the world, a constant reminder that something was fundamentally wrong. Sleep offered no escape. The taste was there even in my dreams, turning pleasant scenes into nightmares of choking on soot and swallowing rusty nails. I'd wake up gagging, the phantom flavors thick in my mouth. Then came the texture. My tongue started to feel rough, like sandpaper. When I looked in the mirror, it looked normal, maybe a little pale, but it felt wrong. Dry, parched, no matter how much I drank. The gritty feeling was stronger now, like tiny particles embedded in the surface. I started to spend hours in the bathroom, staring at my tongue in the harsh light, trying to find the source of the grit, the taste. I'd scrape at it with my fingernail, but nothing came off. It was part of me. The sweetness in the taste grew stronger. It was cloying like rotting fruit. It mixed with the ash and iron and blood, creating a truly sickening combination. My body felt heavy, sluggish. My thoughts felt slow, thick. One afternoon, while scraping at my tongue in front of the mirror, I noticed something truly horrifying. On the surface of my tongue, just barely visible, were tiny, dark flecks, like ash. But they weren't coming off. They were embedded in the tissue. Panic seized me. What were they? I tried to pick one out with my fingernail, but it was impossible. They were too small, too deep, and there were more of them than I had initially seen, scattered across the rough surface of my tongue. The taste intensified, the ash and iron and blood and sickening sweetness filling my mouth, making it hard to breathe. My throat felt constricted. My body felt alien, wrong. Over the next few days, the flecks grew larger, more numerous. They weren't just flecks anymore. They were beginning to form patterns, dark lines and shapes on the surface of my tongue. And the texture became rougher, like coarse bark. The sweetness was overpowering now, a sickly metallic honey. My skin started to feel dry and papery. My hair felt brittle like straw. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes seemed sunken, my face gaunt. The person staring back didn't look like me. He looked like something that had been left out in the sun too long, dried up and decaying. The patterns on my tongue were becoming clearer. They looked like writing. Tiny, intricate characters formed from the dark, embedded flecks. I couldn't read them. They weren't any language I knew, but they were definitely there, covering the surface of my tongue like a grotesque tattoo. The taste was a constant torment, a reminder of the transformation happening within me. Ash, iron, blood, sickening sweetness, and now a new note, something earthy and rotten. My sense of smell was distorted, everything smelling faintly of decay. I started to hear things too, a faint scraping sound from inside my own head, like something dry being dragged across a rough surface. It matched the feeling on my tongue, and sometimes when the static from the walls of the house felt particularly strong. I hadn't noticed it until now, so consumed by my own decay. I thought I could hear faint, dry whispers just below the threshold of understanding. One morning, I woke up and the taste was overwhelming. The sweetness was gone, replaced by pure, choking ash and bitter, rusty iron. My tongue felt like a block of burnt wood in my mouth, rough and unyielding. I staggered to the bathroom, my body heavy and stiff. In the mirror, I opened my mouth and looked at my tongue. The dark patterns were stark against the pale, rough surface. They were raised now like tiny scabs, and they were spreading, moving down the sides of my tongue towards my throat. As I watched, horrified, a tiny piece detached from the surface of my tongue and fell into my mouth. It was dry, black, and shaped like one of the small characters. I gagged, the taste of it pure, concentrated ash and iron. And then I felt it, a dryness deep in my throat, a rasping sensation as something shifted within. The scraping sound in my head intensified. I fell to my knees, coughing, trying to clear my throat. But it wasn't coughing, it was something else. With each retch, something dry and rough was forced up from my lungs, my stomach, my very core. It tasted of the most potent ash and iron I had ever known. I looked down at the sink. What I was expelling wasn't vomit. It was dry, gray, and brittle. Ash. Not the taste of ash. Actual physical ash, falling from my mouth in ragged clumps, mixed with tiny, rusted flecks of iron. As I coughed and choked, expelling the dry, internal decay, I felt a strange detachment. The panic was gone, replaced by a dull, heavy acceptance. The taste in my mouth was overwhelming. The smell in the air was death. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were vacant. My skin was gray and dry. The dark patterns on my tongue were spreading rapidly, merging into a solid black mass. The last thing I felt was a dry, cracking sensation deep within my chest. The last thing I tasted was ash. The last thing I heard was the faint, dry rustle from the walls of the house, joined now by a new sound echoing within my own hollow skull. Click, click, click. Did this story leave you with a lingering bad taste? Give it a like, subscribe to the channel for more true horror, and tell me what you thought in the comments below.